Hey folks, it's Sam, and today I'm here talking about this full moon that we have in Sagittarius. You see, that's coming up July 13th, 2022. Um, Full moons are always important, of course. It's where we unite the energy of the sun sign with the moon sign. This is what I'm going to talk about today. I'll also give a quick rundown of the other planetary placements. But again, this is a very important full moon as well because it's what's called Guru Purnima. I did an earlier video on Guru Purnima and a very detailed explanation of that. Today I'm going to be focusing more on the particular full moon that includes the nakshatras and a few other things, as well as some general forecasts. But before I get to that, I do want to let you know that I do have a special where you can get a discount on my books. I've written two very popular books, one called Yoga and Vedic Astrology, the other one called The Ascendant, 108 Planets of Vedic Astrology. And you can get a discount, both of those books, less than $35. Now, if you were to get them on Amazon, they would be close to $50 plus shipping. So it's quite a discount. And again, these are two very popular books. If you don't know this about me, and a lot of people don't, I've written two very well-known books. The first one, The Ascendant, was published in 2005. So I've been at this for a long time. The other one, Yoga and Vedic Astrology, was published in 2016. On Amazon, if you look, you'll see that Yoga and Vedic Astrology has about 55 favorable reviews. The Ascendant, I don't know how high it is. Both of them are like 5-star reviews. You could check it out here. You can also get an overview of both of these books here at that URL, getsamsbooks.com. And I also would encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel wherever you're watching this, and share this video with others. I like to do these free updates, but they take time. And, you should share the love with others like you're encouraged to do, and also get updates about other, videos that I do before I do them, so that you don't miss any of the current events and the astrological lens through which I, talk about your life on an ongoing basis. As you can see here on YouTube, for instance, I have like 45,000 subscribers. I have close to 30,000 on Facebook and other platforms. So let's get to this. You could see July 13th. This is at about 10:30 Pacific time. We have this exact full moon, which is called Purnima, the full moon day. And this is where we're going to be uniting the energy of Gemini with Sagittarius. Now, as you can see, we have not just the sun in Gemini, but we have Mercury very close by. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini. Venus also joins them on that day. So there's a lot of Gemini energy right now, which is where we're trying to get the story straight in our heads about what's happening. We just had this Mercury retrograde cycle where Mercury was in Taurus going back and forth, where we're trying to get clear about our values, interpreting what's most valuable to us. As we've seen in the last several months, and since Mercury went retrograde in Taurus, this whole cycle, which started, April, May, we've been cycling through a lot of this, reflecting on what's really most valuable to us. We can see culturally and globally a lot of things have shifted since that time. Again, with like wars, we've had big social, especially court decisions and other kinds of focus on events and policies in America and around the world. Things like guns and women's rights and all that have been very, front and center. So these things are very much up for all of us collectively and personally right now. So all of this energy in Gemini is a time for us to really be scrutinizing and talking about these things, communicating about these things, figuring out, do we have the story straight? Is this story that we're telling ourselves individually and collectively really in service to our highest values? Values has to do with Taurus, meaning things that are going to sustain our families, sustain a cooperative existence. Again, all of this is Taurus energy, where we want to live a stable, solid, happy, healthy life. Again, think of your family or think of anyone's family. We don't agree with everyone in the family. People have different values. People have different, things that allow them to feel good and to feel settled and happy. But we try to come together and have tolerance for everyone's value system. And again, this is very much related to Venus. So again, all this energy that's been shifting from Taurus into Gemini is how we can understand the larger cycle rather than just saying, full moon in Sagittarius, hope, now's the time to be inspired. That's just, it's not getting the full picture because there's always a time to be inspired. Jupiter in Pisces is a time to be inspired. There's always that. But what are we really looking at here? And where are we coming from? And where are we landing right now? Again, not just collectively, but personally. Again, you can feel this even in your own life with the values of your friends, right? It's not necessarily, personally like in your own individual life, but Taurus energy, which is where we're coming from, particularly where Mercury is coming from, where the sun has just come from, is the stable structures and the community and the family that not only you were raised in, but that you're building. Like I have a family with the people in my school, like with my students and teachers and friends. And I have a family with people that I play tennis and I, have, I live in a building, in a condo complex, and I see people and know them. And we have this structure built up around us. This is really what Taurus energy is and how Taurus moves into Gemini. Taurus is that structure that we already have. Gemini is how it makes sense to us, how we think about and reflect on the values and the community and the culture that we have, and where we rebel against it and we find new values, where we find new ways of doing things. For example, I just moved out of the tennis club that I have been in for about 3 years. I just quit the club and now I'm in another club because the other ones weren't really taking care of the players very well. It's more of a country club, not a tennis club. But I still have a lot of friends that I'd played tennis with there for years. So we're still in contact with each other. And, we're fun, we're like making other plans and arrangements. But they might decide that, he's not in the club anymore. So I'm not really sure if we can sort of work it out. So communication around these things, it's always a bit interesting. And again, this is a good metaphor even for what we wind up doing in the Taurus cycle, where we have a routine. And by the way, I had a lot of routine with the tennis club. I would go there 2 or 3 times a week. It was worth it for me to change that routine and do something different because that was more in alignment with what I was really looking for from a club. For example, some of them have families. They go there with their kids. They sit around the pool. It's not really just a tennis club for them. It's more of a social environment. It was much more of a Taurus-y kind of thing for them. For me, I didn't sit there and sit around the pool with my family and hang out in the bar and all of that. I wanted to just play tennis. So the place where I'm at now, they don't have any of that. It's actually just a bunch of tennis courts. There is no club in it. And I like that better because it's all just geared around people who want to play tennis. And you get a list of like 50 people that also want to play. And there's constant engagement, which is really what I was always hoping that the previous club would actually do. But they never did any of that. So again, it might sound like it's just a personal anecdote. It's not. It's a metaphor for how we change. By the way, all that happened in Mercury retrograde when it was going back and forth in Taurus. That's when I changed and left the club. And I was talking with a lot of my other friends to try to bring them over to this club as well, because I like playing tennis with them. And they still might. But it might also be where now I don't have them as friends anymore because the thing we did together, kind of the shared value, the shared experience we had, was meeting at that club to play tennis. I can't go to that club anymore unless I want to pay a fee, which I actually don't. I invite them to play at my condo. I could invite them to play at this other club. So this is really me as Gemini, or you, let's say in your life, sort of rebelling against the values of what you're involved in. It can be family. It could be friends. Sometimes it has nothing to do with them personally. It just happens to do with the environment. We move on from something else. And that's an example of this same principle where it's not about them personally. I'd like to bring them along with me, but I might not. And I'm willing to risk losing them, let's say, as people that I interact with regularly, if it means that now I get to do this thing that's more in line with my interest. And that's very much the Gemini thing. And by the way, that's very much a concept and a principle of Gemini in general. Gemini is very much a sign of freedom, freedom to explore new things, look for new things. It's ruled by Mercury, which is always investigating new ways to do things. It's an air sign. Again, the air is about freedom, freedom to move, freedom to do something different, freedom to express ourselves. And I expressed myself many times, even to the management there. By the way, not just me, many of us players did, we were always after that management to like, why don't you just give us a list of everybody who wants to play, make it voluntary, where people can volunteer to be on a list of your ranking and just share it with each other so that we can all have easier access to each other. They would never do it. So again, not having my words and my desires to make things easier for us met, I eventually moved on. But this is very much a quality of Gemini, even in your life. It moves on from the Taurus thing. Okay, I already have these values and this structure, but am I able to express myself and my uniqueness and whatnot within that construct? And it's very, very much about, for example, things like in the family that you grew up in, there was a value, there were values in the family that you grew up in, but you're a unique individual and have your own individual desires, individual interests that aren't in alignment with the family. This is why, like, you might have siblings or even with your parents or other people, cousins, and your values are maybe quite different than them now because of a Gemini Mercury kind of principle, right? To want to express yourself. So there's a lot of this self-expression, individuality, maybe leaving the past, moving to something different. All of the things I mentioned earlier about like court decisions and war and all of the other things that we see right now in the world is causing us to rethink maybe a lot of our ideas. By the way, I'll just say this. I know a lot of people who, let's say like during the pandemic and during there was a time, especially with the rise of a lot of the conservatism, republicanism, Trumpism, and all of that, they like moved out of California, moved to Texas. Texas was the big Texas. And I know several of them who moved to Texas. And I've even seen on social media now, since the court handed down its overturning Roe, Texas is one of the most conservative states in the country now. How does that move look now in retrospect? You left California because it was such a, leftist, oppressive, hellscape. Again, this is what the media portrayed it. By the way, I live in California. The restrictions with COVID, for example, it wasn't much. I mean, we had the lockdowns like everybody, and then everything pretty much opened up with restrictions, and we really haven't been doing much of anything. Now, there are places where they have been doing more, I'm sure, but the point of the matter is to talk about California like it's a monolith was a lot of propaganda anyway, because they were actually using areas like San Francisco and the Bay Area, LA, where there's more densely populated areas. They definitely cracked down more, but in general, all I'm saying is since these rulings came down, I know at least 4 people that I know personally, not to mention about 15 or 20 others that I've seen online who are like really rethinking their Austin. Now I'm in Texas. Yay. It's like, well, how's it looking now? Now that you were in California before, and I know that you like the liberal ideas that we have to offer in California. Now you're in like the conservative bastion, and you're rethinking these ideas, right? Again, this is Gemini's where we're considering what our values were before, the value that maybe made you leave. Now you're thinking, maybe that wasn't what I thought, or maybe it was. This is just an example, by the way. And again, I don't want to trigger people because these are triggering things. Nobody can hear an issue laid out sensibly. Maybe it's the other way as well. Absolutely. Someone, moved from a conservative to a liberal state, and now they're thinking that too, or some other principle. I just use this one because it's relative to my example and kind of cogent with the conservatism that we've seen recently from our courts, guns and whatnot as well. overturning gun laws, overturning environmental regulations and things like that on a collective level. But on a personal level and on a more localized way, and in your life, aside from larger socio-political schemes, you can see how in your life, like the example I just said about my tennis club, there's other things even aren't in my building. I do a lot of these talks extemporaneously. I don't plan a lot of what I'm going to say. These themes come up and then I just sort of notice it in my life as well. But there's also a lot of gathering happening in my condo now, interestingly, around the concept of playing tennis, because we have 5 tennis courts and there's like 125 units in this condo. A lot of people play tennis, but it's never been organized. And a few of us have tried with the HOA before to say, can we just send out a blanket message to people who want to be on a tennis list? And before, for some reason, I know why the HOA didn't want us to do it, because the head of the HOA couldn't care less, which is always often the way HOAs work. The things the president of the HOA cares about gets done. The things the rest of us do, we'll look into that. So anyway, finally, someone did allow that. So there's been more of a sort of communal vibe, even around playing tennis here in my condo, because we have 5 courts that are empty like all the time. Even though there's probably 30 or 40 people in this complex who like to go and play. So getting organized even around that value is something that I've seen here recently with these planets moving through Taurus and now in Gemini, being more cooperative and interacting with each other. I always notice when planets go into Gemini, and when we have this shift into Gemini around the summer, people become quite friendly. Like, I've been going to the beach a lot more and whatnot. For me, it's always good because I have a lot of planets there anyway, but just noticing the friendliness of others, and how people get very, very chatty and like to find common ground. This is very much Gemini energy, but it can also get dispersed in a sort of trivial way. In a larger context, it's very easy to just kind of be entertained by our thoughts and not connect them to something higher, something more worthy. For example, again, things like our teachings and our higher principles and our, a sense of purpose. And so when we get the full moon in Sagittarius, Sagittarius is that sign of higher meaning and purpose. As I've already said, this is called Guru Purnima. I did a video about that a couple days ago where you can see it's very important to understand why it's Guru Purnima. I'm going to touch on it a little bit here in those principles, but what the guru actually is, how you're actually following teachings anyway that give your life meaning, whether you know it or not. But now is a time to really dial that in and measure what you believe against your greater common sense and see how much the things you believe you can actually explain. And then get enormous gratitude for your teachers as a result. Because one of the things about Gemini is where we really want to understand things. We don't want to just believe. It's easy to just believe that there's something bigger because we can feel so small, right? It's easy to believe that there's a large benevolent force, right? But how does it work, and how can we explain it? Everybody tries. Everybody's got an explanation. Even though people go, well, I don't really know. If you press them, they do think they know. Everybody thinks they have an idea. Well, to me, it's just la da da da. And that's the belief, right? The more someone is really investigated, especially the more they've done meditation and spiritual practices, it becomes much less vague. But it also becomes much more reinforced, because then you get to engineer that inspiration rather than just having this inspiration come over you sometimes and wonder, wow, what was going on then? I was so inspired and sort of bewildered by the fact that, wow, I'm feeling really hopeful now. What's going on? You know how to engineer that, meaning it's not just something that comes over you somehow. It's something that you set up your life to revolve around. And that's really what the promises of this full moon in Gemini, this full moon in Sagittarius, with all this energy, all this Sun, Mercury, Venus, and this power in Gemini, is because, again, Gemini is about experimentation. It's about doing things. It's not, I mean, it's about exploring new things and then trying them, implementing them, experimenting with them, having fun, but not getting seduced by the fun part. The fun part is as you're exploring it. Then you get a good answer. Once you find those good answers, like you have, obviously, because you're listening to me, then apply the teachings. That's the Sagittarius part where you actually, again, read the books, but then apply what's in the books. And then you find the teachings and then you apply the teachings. When you do this, then you're not just somehow inspired for some reason. You learn how to engineer that inspiration every day. You wake up and you do a practice that inspires you. Then once you get to watching the news or doing this or that, you're coming from a place that already has contextualized your existence. If you're never doing those things, then you're just always losing yourself to the periphery. You're losing yourself to the peripheral world. When you do these practices connect you to the center, to your center. Your center is not out here. Your center is in here. And so this is an incredibly important full moon in that way, because it takes the ideas that you already have, again, like I said, you somehow, in some way, no matter how awkward or clumsy it might feel, you think you got a clue. And I'm not saying you don't, but you definitely have an explanation about what you think is going on. Oh yeah, to me, it's this, and I just and la la da, and that's great. That's great. But it's time. But think about: is any of that true? Aren't I fun to listen to? Is any of that real? Is any of that true, or are these just ideas I'm kind of playing with? I'm playing with these ideas now. Maybe I'm kind of playing with that idea. I mean, is any of that true and real? What were you playing with last year? What ideas? What was it last year? Again, maybe it is. Maybe it's rock solid. But again, unless there is a coherent, cogent practice that connects you with something that's transcendent, which, by the way, is your nature, then you're just kind of playing with these ideas to kind of explain the thing that you believe, and you do believe it, but you don't really understand it very well. And this is why I talk about the things that you don't have to understand it very well. By the way, I'm not saying I understand it. In fact, I will tell you, I don't understand. I understand the structures because I've explored the details that work, but I don't know how they work. No one knows how anything happens. By the way, I talk about that in the beginning of this book. One of the things about this book that's really good, that people really love, and that I recommend, the first 100 pages or so are literally about yogic principles, and then at about the 100th page, then we start in with astrology, right? But the first part of the book is actually about this idea that no one really knows how anything works. And it literally proves to you that Vedic astrology is a science, every bit as legitimate as every other science. I'll give you an example. People think, well, medicine is a science. Doctors, they're applying science because they know how the body works. Astrology, they don't really even know how it works, but they know how medicine works. They know that a doctor is practicing science, but an astrologer, that's pseudoscience. Well, in the beginning of the book, I clearly let you realize that that's simply not true. The doctor is no more of a scientist than an astrologer. And you might not know this, but you realize that the doctor doesn't know how the body does what it does. The doctor does exactly what an astrologer does. He observes the effect of certain chemicals, compounds, whatnot. Throughout history, they've been recording what happens with this ingredient, that ingredient. They examine things microscopically, and then they'll give you some medicine to create a predictable effect. But they're never 100% sure, and most importantly, they don't know how the body does what it does. They can see what it's doing, but they don't know how it happens, which is the big thing they assail astrologers with. Well, they don't even know how it happens. How does it happen? How does it happen? And then astrologers foolishly try to answer the question, well, I think it's energy. Well, I think it's this, instead of learning the correct answer, which is, I don't know how it works. How does anything work? We don't even know how a seed becomes a plant. And if you think we do know how, you haven't examined this far enough. You can throw the seed in the ground and do everything right, and this particular seed will not sprout. Why? No one knows. The farmer can't make the seed sprout. The farmer can do everything correctly. He can till the soil, he can put the seed in the right way, he can do it at the right time, give it the right amount of water, and it still doesn't grow. Why? Because the farmer is helpless. What makes it grow? No one knows. So we call it something like God. To finish on the doctor example, let me tell you what I mean, and it's the example I use in my book. You can go to the doctor. Even a 5-year-old can reveal that the doctor doesn't know how the body is doing what it's doing. Let's say that a doctor is examining a 5-year-old child, and the child says, "What are you doing?" And the doctor says, "I'm checking your pulse." And the 5-year-old child says, "Well, what is that?" And the doctor says, "It shows that your heart is beating. I can feel your heart beating by touching your wrist." And then the child says, "Well, how does the heart keep beating?" Very simple questions. How does that work? And the doctor says, "Well, deep in your brain, there's an autonomic signal that's sent from deep in your brain to your heart that keeps your heart beating over and over again. It also keeps your lungs breathing." And then the child says, "Well, how does that work? How does the signal get sent?" And the doctor says, "Well, it's deep in your physiology, that very deeply hardwired." And then the child says, "But how does it happen? Where does that spark come from? Who sends the spark?" And then the doctor goes, "I don't know." 2 or 3 questions, and you realize the doctor doesn't know how anything works. The farmer doesn't know how the seed sprouts. All that we can do, all that any of us can do, ever, every person that's ever existed, that means an astrologer, a doctor, a scientist, a farmer, nuclear physicist, nobody knows how any of it works. The best we can do is observe certain effects because we've observed them before, and then generally predict what's going to happen next with this set of variables. That's all a doctor is doing. He doesn't know how the medicine works. Now, again, he can give the medicine and then let's say microscopically watch it go into a cell and do the thing. If we're that, like let's say a molecular physicist or whoever it is that examines these things under microscopes, they can see the effect of this, compound on a disease or whatever, but they don't know how it's doing it. Again, they might be able to understand that the nucleotides of this enacts with this thing, but that's exactly the same thing as an astrologer would do. I don't know how it does it, but I know what the energetic matrix is because I've investigated it now long enough. I know, for example, that Gemini is an air sign. So all the stuff I've been saying so far about where we're going, where we've been, it's because I'm evaluating variables the same way. I know Gemini is air. It's also what's called Rajasic, which is full of activity. It's dual. It's this way. It's ruled by Mercury, which is this. It's this thing. I could say that, it was just in Taurus, which is Earth. It goes retrograde and back. It went forward and back. There was a certain amount of time. I'm just doing the same kind of variables, and it can get as granular as you like based on how specific the predictions are. What I'm saying in this video isn't that specific about an individual person. If I was talking to an individual person, I could drill down into micro details. And I mean so many details that it can be overwhelming if somebody doesn't keep them in the proper context, if they don't contextualize them properly. But this is exactly what a doctor does. Don't think for 1 second that astrology isn't every bit as much a science as what we call scientists. And especially if you're in the Western world, you don't hear this at all because most of the time, Western astrologers, and I know this, will come out and say, "Oh, well, astrology is definitely not a science. It's not a science. It's not a science." And they run from it like they're running from a wildfire. It's not a science. I didn't say it was a science. It can never be proven. And I'm just like, no, it is a science. It's every bit as scientific as every other Western scientist, or as every other Western science. We do exactly the same thing. Based on thousands of years of research, we can predict what's going to happen based within a set of variables. It's never 100%, but nothing's 100%. And again, people ask if astrology is something they don't ask of other scientists. Well, how come astrologers say different things? If astrology works, it should be 100% right. Again, because they approach it from an unrealistic perspective. They ask things of astrologers they don't ask of any other scientist. How much do doctors get things wrong? We go to second opinions for doctors all the time because they say different things. But astrologers are supposed to be uniform, or the fact that you take the individual's choice out of the variable. So again, and I'm talking about this in this context now because it's also very important to understand this is extremely appropriate for this cycle now. For you to really understand these things and understand what you think you understand. Practice what you think you might be practicing, but rethink what it is that what you already believe. Like maybe even 10 minutes ago, you actually believed, oh yeah, doctors do know how the body works and astrologers aren't really sure. No, they don't know how it works. They're doing the same thing astrologers are doing. Think about it. Again, one of the biggest knocks against astrology is, well, how does it even work? Are the planets emitting rays? Carl Sagan, the great, guru of the world. I mean, I like a lot that Carl Sagan said, but I can never forgive him for his total shameful take on astrology. And again, because he lives in a culture that allows him to make these shameful, stupid remarks, by the way, where he's talking about how astrology is pseudoscience and the doctor standing next to you has more gravity than the planets. We've all heard this before. An entire TV show, basically, where he just trashed astrology. He knows nothing about it. He knows zero about astrology, nothing. He knows nothing about how it works. To him, astrology was horoscopes. And again, because he lives in a culture that gives cover to that kind of pseudo-intellectual rubbish, he was able to do that with no pushback whatsoever. Not only him, Bill Nye and all the other Western scientists who crap on astrology and they don't even know what it is. They literally don't know what it is. Stop giving these people a free pass. Stop acting like Carl Sagan was the greatest guru ever. He was a scientist and he was smart, but listen to what he said about astrology and hold him to account for it. It was disgusting. Look it up online. You'll see. He knows nothing about what he's saying. He simply doesn't know what he's talking about. He's as bad as a Christian fundamentalist who thinks it's the work of the devil or something. He's like one notch above that. If one notch, he's barely one notch above that. So, and he benefits from a culture that agrees with him, at least at the time, and just allowed him to say all of this. Again, no context of the Eastern world, the rest of the world, or even bothering to learn what astrology is. Frankly, didn't even mention that, Johannes Kepler and Newton and Galileo and all the ancient astronomers that he quoted all the time also understood what astrology was, that it wasn't a religion, that it was a practice. So again, I'm only saying this because there's a lot of hypnosis around like even what astrology is. And I'm saying this to you as someone who's listening to an astrologer and who obviously believes in astrology. Again, it's not a religion. It's not something you should believe in. It's something you should practice. It's not something I believe in, but it doesn't mean that it's subservient. I don't believe in Western medicine either. I don't believe in any of these things because they're not beliefs. Scientists like Carl Sagan aren't gods. Neither are medical doctors. Everybody is doing the same thing. We're all observing through our senses. It's all a play of the senses, and the senses are prone to mistakes, and we're enmeshed in Maya, and we're all doing the same thing. On that level, Vedic astrology and Western astrology too, whether they know it or not, even though Western astrologers will tell you it's not a science, they're as scientific as doctors because they're doing the same thing, observing the effects practicing it like a doctor practices medicine, but they're looking at chemicals in the blood and you're looking at a birth chart. It's just a different set of variables with a probability ratio. So now's a time when these kinds of things should be on your mind. You should be pondering these things and understanding what is it that you really believe. Again, in my Guru Purnima video, I said we believe a lot of things. We're full of beliefs. We have beliefs about relationships, about the nature of the world, about these things I'm saying now. What is astrology? What is real science? We have beliefs about all kinds of things. And right now, with this full moon in Sagittarius, is really a time to try to unite those explanations. We can tell what we really believe by how we explain it. And we can tell how well our beliefs make sense to us by how well we can explain it. For example, you just heard mine, and you understand the things that I believe, and you understand how much I understand what I believe by my explanations. I could ask you, what do you believe about something? And the explanations you would give would show me exactly how much you actually understand what you believe. What you believe, Sagittarius, understand Gemini. These two things can come together, and the more you investigate one and question the other, the more the thing elevates and the more it gets elevated. So what you believe relative to how well you're able to explain it is the big thing that's happening right now. In addition, it's taking all of that desire to investigate things. Again, Gemini just wants to investigate, wants to figure things out. You need to connect it to something that's higher. The reason my understanding of these things is pretty sophisticated in this way is because I've been exploring these things for a long time, and I plugged into these sacred teachings. Like I said in my book, Yoga and Vedic Astrology, the whole first part of it is explaining the yogic frameworks, what's called Sankhya philosophy. And the reason I've gotten a very nuanced understanding of these things isn't because I'm so smart. It's because I've plugged into great teachings. These Vedic teachings are the highest, I think it's the culmination of human understanding. By the way, all the ancient cultures had a similar knowledge, but it got lost over time. And the Indian systems are still preserved. So the reason my understanding of my beliefs have elevated and spiraled upward is because of these great teachings. And when you plug into these great teachings, your natural inquisitiveness and desire to understand and figure things out has a great structure in which to capture it and elevate it. Then instead of just meandering all over the place looking for answers with no good teachings, you plug that natural curiosity into a spiral structure, or a structure that then spirals upward. And I say spiral because it's kind of like this. It's like now your natural curiosity, if you connect it with higher teachings. By the way, I would really recommend getting my book if you don't have it, because it does this, or in this astrological lens, very easily. But it's a spiral because you have this level of understanding now, or these ideas about things, then you plug it into a greater system and automatically it elevates it. But then as it elevates, because of the system, then you get more inquisitive, and then it pushes this up more. Then you get more of an understanding, but then the system is also deeper. Then you get more understanding and more depth, more understanding, more depth. This is why the more you learn, the more curiosity you bring to bear. When you're in a deeper system, you just go deeper into the knowledge and the wisdom, and then you get a deeper explanation that comes. You're like, wow, I thought it was this, but now that I understand it more and saw it in practice more, my explanation is now 10 times deeper. Now that I can explain it deeper, and I go back and I revisit the teachings again, now I'm revisiting the teachings from a much deeper place. So now I understand them even more. And now that I understand them more, my interpretations are much deeper now, because then it becomes an experiential spiral. It's a spiral because it's going back and forth like this. Boom, 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 boom. It's like a spiral, and it spirals upward. This is why, again, the students of mine that have been studying with me for a long time, they've definitely experienced this because, people will get like an introductory class or something and they see these principles laid out and it's all very enjoyable and stimulating in their mind. But some people, it really captures them, and it really brings a depth into their life. And that depth then makes them want to learn more. And then they learn more. And again, that spiral starts. Then they might get a certification course. Then you're really getting even more immersed. And as you get into something like that, for example, now you're being taught how to examine not just the chart, but your whole life based on these universal principles. And then a whole trajectory starts. So again, that's this interplay between Mercury and Sagittarius that's up right now. Dialing in great teachings so that these explanations you have, these ideas you have about what's really going on, spirals upward. Spirals upward. Right now you have an explanation for things. Maybe it's not even, you haven't even examined them that much. You're like, oh yeah, half of it comes from other people and other things. What people say about you or your relationships and your family past. Again, Gemini comes after Taurus. So much of what we think comes from how we were raised and all that kind of stuff. Half of it's not even really examined. We don't examine it. We don't plug into powerful teachings that allows us to spiral upward. So notice these messages that are really coming to you now as we get toward this full moon. Again, the exact day of the full moon is the 13th. The night of the 12th and into the 13th. That's when we have Purnima. So notice on the night of the 12th and into around half the day of the 13th, if you're on the west coast of the U.S., how these great teachings and what's really expanding you, what's really taking your existing ideas about things and contextualizing them in a larger way. Again, maybe it's not just about life. Maybe it's you're learning great lessons about relationships or about your career. For example, like if you're a Virgo person right now, then this full moon is happening in, the Gemini cycle. This is the focal point of the cycle, is where the sun is, not where the full moon is. But if you're a Virgo person, for example, you're really examining a lot of your ideas about taking responsibility and handling pressure and whatnot, right? So all of these Gemini themes show up in your career and your sense of duty and responsibility. One second. If you're Pisces, these things show up as a deeper inner emotional core, emotional strength. So you're exploring and investigating things on that level. But then opposite that is where the full moon comes and says, okay, this is what I need to bring into my life to spiral upward and to complete that circuit. This is also like a circuit. The circuit isn't completed until you integrate its opposite. That's really the way a circuit works. Just like the polarities of a magnet, right? The north and the south really slam them together. This is like a completing of a circuit, all these oppositions. So now's the time to really complete that Gemini informational communication circuit with the Sagittarian inspiration, purpose, great teachings, great systems of learning circuit. You need to plug that curiosity, that curious mind into a system that really captures it. And again, a few other things. Most important is this Jupiter is in Pisces right now, which really facilitates that higher possibility, right? With Jupiter in Pisces right now, it's very mystical possibility, mystical promise of these times where it's not just, possible that, okay, I believe stuff. Now you're getting good teachings. I know this because Jupiter in Pisces means that your mind, all of our minds, are seeing beneath the veils of illusion. This is why we're seeing so many veils of illusion removed. And again, I don't want to get into the social political realm or whatever, but we're seeing a lot of that too now. The kind of bald-faced aggression, brute force power plays. Especially, we're seeing a lot of that. Or at least we tend to notice that, right? The veils being lifted. Pisces is where the veils and Maya and the illusion is very active. And with Jupiter, we're seeing the veils being lifted. Maybe the veils of recent years or whatnot, because Jupiter just, for the last couple years, Jupiter was in these signs of Saturn. He was debilitated during that year of COVID and all of that. And then after that, we've been like scraping back and forth with Jupiter through Aquarius, back and forth. So Jupiter's had some heavy times these last couple years. Now he's in Pisces, where there's a high potential to see these veils lifted. Again, but lifting the veils shouldn't necessarily be like, oh, that's great, veils are lifted. No, the veils are lifted, showing a lot of the brutality and the terrible stuff that is beneath, right? On that level, we can see that collectively. But again, personally and experientially for you, this is also a great catalyst, or can be a great catalyst for you to now, I guess, grow up, which I'm going to get to when I talk about Saturn, is the growing up part, but the connect to things that are transcendent. Your solutions are not going to be found externally in this world. You lose yourself to the periphery. You're trying to find yourself in people, politics, the outer world, all these other things that are going on. Political solutions. Yes, we all want to live in a happy world and share this beautiful world, and we have to do what we can do. I do what I can do to speak and try to speak the truth. Inside, though, that's where the salvation is. You can make as a foundation of your life these spiritual practices. When you start your day and end your day from that place of deep embodiment of these teachings, and when your intellectual mind, when you comprehend and understand this, really, not just some idea, oh yeah, I also think that, yeah, I also think that, but what about my job? What about my family? What about this? What? And you're not putting any of it into practice, then it's just an idea that's distracting you from the real work of getting those good teachings and then putting them into practice, growing up and being mature about them, which is Saturn now. Saturn, by the time we have this full moon, will have gone back into Capricorn. He's between Capricorn and Aquarius now. So either way, Saturn is trying to really connect us with the willingness to sit in discomfort, to sit in our ignorance, and to be still and silent and just face those fears, face that truth. By the way, when you implement spiritual practices like yoga, breath, mantra, and the joyful practices, it's easy to meditate after that. But Saturn is really the one that brings in the meditation part and the ability to sit still, to be silent, and to have that be peaceful. If you try to sit still and be silent now, if you don't have a spiritual practice, sitting still, closing your eyes is going to be anything but silent. It's going to be anything but peaceful. In fact, once you close your eyes and turn inward and block out all the external distraction, you just become aware of your insanity. You become aware of your mental chaos until you learn the spiritual practice. And that's the truth with everybody. That's just the nature of the mind. And it's the nature of what's called Maya. First, we have to navigate this illusion. And so Saturn, where we start with Saturn energy, is this fear of death. And once we acknowledge and realize that underneath it all, this is what creates a fearful, anxious ego trying to survive. That whole structure is illusion because that's not your true nature. That idea can really compel you to then develop spiritual practices, especially that are infused with devotion to a guru and just gratitude for these higher teachings, and that these practices are available. You don't need the mantra for you, the specific spiritual practice only for you. No, that's not how it works. You're not that important. You're not that different. You're an ego who has a bunch of ideas that are based on fear, and you need to learn how to be still, calm the mind, say mantra, do breath. It works on everybody, just like aspirin works on everybody. It's just a simple thing that works. Science works. This is why aspirin works on everybody. It doesn't matter your culture, your gender, whatever. It's not your specific headache. It's a blood thinner. It thins the blood, and the headache stops, or the muscle ache. Same way is true with meditation. You move your body a certain way as you breathe, and you anchor the mind on a mantra. It's going to calm you down, make you still and peaceful. And then when you sit down afterward to try to introspect, your mind is already still and peaceful. But if you never do those things, and instead you just have a bunch of ideas about what all that is, nothing changes. So again, these powerful planets are really assisting you, not to mention Mars in Aries. Mars in Aries, very much about discipline. Discipline, which is the willingness to do the difficult thing right now. And rather than sit down and, eat that half a pint of ice cream and watch some TV and chill out, you're like, no, that's making me weak. That's making me weak. Mars in Aries is saying, I don't want to be weak. I'm willing to suffer a little bit for my principles and do the things that I know are right. A lot of power in this full moon with all these planets in their own signs. Of course, we already talked about Mercury so much because all the Gemini energy, all of that stuff I was explaining about having the discrimination to see through these things are very powerful now. And this moon in Sagittarius, of course, is that reflection of the heart inside, where we feel that gratitude for these teachings, the gratitude that these teachings exist, feeling grateful that these teachings exist. Finally, I'll talk about the nakshatras here, especially the nakshatra of the full moon is Purva Ashada. And Purva Ashada means early victory, and it's very devotional. You have so much to be grateful for. You're alive. If you're watching this video, you probably have enough food. You're probably not fighting for your life, running for your life in terror over something. So much to be grateful for. You have this moment, you have this breath, you probably have enough food, and we're not grateful at all because we don't remember our true nature. So Purva Ashada is it's ruled by Appas, which is the god of the ocean, and it's related to devotion, devotional practices. And I used the example earlier about the farmer who plants the seed. We plant the seed in mula. Mula literally means about planting a seed, uprooting the previous darkness and planting the seed of devotion. And then we have to nurture and water those seeds in Purva Ashada. We give love, devotion, bhakti to nurture that seed. If the farmer wants that seed to become a plant, first he has to nurture that seed before it's even visible. While the seed is underground, the farmer can't even see it. It's hidden, just like it's hidden in you. That seed potential is hidden. And this is important to understand because we tend to only want to do things that we can outwardly express and we can and people can praise us for. Nobody's going to praise you for your spiritual practices. Nobody cares. But if you want spiritual truth, you have to nurture that thing that's hidden inside of you. And then eventually what happens though, just like the sprout that breaks the surface, eventually those spiritual practices start to bust out and break through the surface. And they start to come out of you like a beautiful flower or something. And then people start to notice, wow, you seem so much more calm, so much more peaceful. And then immediately your ego seizes on it. Oh yeah, it's true, I am. I've been meditating. And then as soon as we get a little bit of a result, we want to start blabbing it to everybody and teaching everybody. By the way, I see this with people who've taken one astrology class and now they're an astrologer. Don't do that. Nurture the seed so that it's not just a little sapling. First, you nurture it when it's invisible, but then even as it breaks the surface, let it grow before you start bragging about it or whatever. Let it become something. It might become a mighty tree that then becomes the shade. Like I say, the analogy is that that little sprout, that little seed of spirituality can grow into a mighty oak, a mighty tree that is then shade for many others, refuge for many others who are in the hot sun and the heat of their discomfort, of the heat of their ignorance. Your spiritual growth, if you allow it to really grow, can become a great refuge for others on their path. But if you just look for a little validation, oh see, I'm meditating, see, now I'm teaching it, now I'm an expert, and it just goes to serve the ego, nothing much is going to change. But notice this hidden nurturing. And think of everything in your life that's been meaningful and powerful in your life has gone through this process. You had to uproot something, you had to then plant something new, and then you have to nurture and water that seed. You nurture and water that seed, and the more you do that with devotion, notice what I said, devotion. You nurture it and it breaks through the surface. You still keep nurturing and watering it with devotion because you're devoted, because you're thankful, because you're grateful. And then if someone's like, wow, you seem, more peaceful, it's like, well, I appreciate that. And you're humbled because you know how easy it is for your mind to become crazy again. So you don't get seduced by the attention or the approval. You keep grateful, devotional, devoted. This is why a great guru is such a blessing, because all great gurus are the most humble, the most devoted, the most grateful. My Guru Amma, Guru Dev Ravi Shankar, all the great masters were incredibly humble because they're not associated with the ego looking good or whatever it might be. So notice these things. Well, I hope this was helpful. And again, I just want to let people know that there are, you can get books. If you go to getsamsbooks.com, you've seen it going along the bottom. You can get these 2 books. Again, there's an overview there. And again, please also share this with others if it's been helpful for you. I love doing these videos. But again, it takes quite a bit of work to, get things together and whatnot. And I do appreciate if you share with others and you appreciate and share the love that specific way. Okay. So thanks a lot.